Hey everybody, welcome to your readings for the week. These are the readings for the week ending April 15th, which is the beginning of the shadow period of the next Mercury retrograde, which is officially starting a week from Saturday. So the 15th, the very last day of this week, is the beginning as we enter into the shadow period of that retrograde, which is a full Taurus retrograde this time around. So yeah, we're gonna kind of sort of start that, but we have the whole week before we start that. So I guess that is the good news. We're going to go ahead and get started with our readings. We're going to start as we always do with Darcy. Let's take a look here and see what we have going on. So we have a couple of things actually. We have Mercury, of course, is in Taurus. We're going to have a full Taurus retrograde. Mercury is going to be in Taurus, right? So we do have Mercury in Taurus, moving into conjunction with Uranus. Doesn't quite make it into that conjunction, but it's very, very close. So more than likely, chances are that conjunction is going to happen next week and not necessarily this week. Uranus itself is not really interacting with a whole lot with other planets this week, which is kind of a, in a way, it's kind of a good thing. But Mercury is in some cases, and we're looking specifically at a sextile. Mercury has a sextile with Mars towards the end of the week. Mars has been in this position of being focused on our inner trauma, and Mars is very much associated with anger. So while this is a very positive aspect as these planets are working together, Mercury's focus is right on the cusp of support and career. There's still that little bit of an element of needing to release some old anger in order to make sure that this old anger isn't getting in your way or holding you back in some way, if that makes sense. We all have inner trauma. We all have mindsets that were created in childhood around that trauma. And sometimes those mindsets just really aren't working in our favor, if that makes sense. We do have a bit of an issue towards the end of the week. Actually, no, it's not an issue. As let me just take a look, see here. Yes, so we have a little bit of an issue towards the end of the week, Friday, right before we get into that shadow period of the Mercury retrograde, when the moon moves into a position to be squared with Uranus and Mercury at the same time as they're moving into that conjunction. So this is a little bit actually of a challenge. The moon's focus is right on the cusp of relationships and finances. So we're looking specifically at your relationship with money. The other two planets are very much, still focused on that support system. This is actually a very familiar argument for me, really. And of course, the moon being in Aquarius means that obviously it's going to come up for me again, which I'm so incredibly happy about, really. But bottom line here is that your relationship to your money, in terms of finding support for that, I feel like there's two things that are coming up. One is that in many ways you're just tired of dealing with your responsibilities to your finances all by yourself, and it would be nice to have some support with that. I'm just gonna say this. The grass is always greener on the other side, because oftentimes it's fertilized with bullshit. Okay, it's not always what it seems in terms of somebody having a companion or a partner that is there to help them with their financial responsibilities. Take my word for it. Okay, it doesn't always guarantee what you think it guarantees. Okay, so in some cases it creates more of a problem than you really need, specifically because you don't have that problem now, so why bring it on, right? So you don't want to make any rash emotional decisions simply because you want support financially, if that makes sense. There has to be other things that are taken into consideration with that relationship, as well as, you know, somebody that's going to help you with that financial responsibility, if that makes sense. Also, you don't want your finances to be the root of an emotional decision ever. That's really never a good idea, because for most people, what that looks like is overspending, underspending, not allocating your money in the most responsible way. So just be aware of that, I guess, specifically around that day. And we're looking at Friday at the end of the week. So bottom line here is Uranus's influence is a very unique, out of the box way of looking at things. And when we're talking about those people that are there to support you specifically, we're not just talking about the people that you would know, your normal go-tos for support. We're also talking about those individuals that you've never thought of maybe going to support for, or going to for support, I should say, because they just wouldn't necessarily be a personality that you would think is supportive. But maybe in this particular challenge that you're facing right now, it's the exact type of support that you really need, if that makes sense. So that's what I have for you, Darcy. And I am going to move on to Kendra. So we are entering the shadow period of that Mercury retrograde right at the end of the week here. The retrograde officially starts on the 21st. So the shadow period is the 15th. So we have 6 whole days of this week until that happens. Mercury's already in Taurus, prepared for this retrograde, moving into conjunction with Uranus, which of course continues to be in Taurus as well. Mercury's sextile with Mars is very interesting. Mars continues to be focused on inner trauma and the release of anger from that inner trauma. It really feels like he's been in this space for a really long time. And you know, in honesty, it's been a couple of months. So he kind of is. This is actually a very helpful aspect. This is where the planets are coming together and working together. And I feel like Mercury's communication has a lot to do with this, specifically around your support system. So this anger is coming up around situations where you don't feel like you're being supported. The way that you would normally communicate about that is probably not going to work out very well. In fact, it may cause a bigger problem. So we all have communication patterns that we fall into, specifically with the people that are close to us. So say your spouse, for example. If you're not feeling supported, the last thing you want to do is go to him and in an accusatory way, it says, hey, you're not supporting me. That's going to cause another one of those really fun arguments that I know you want to have, being sarcastic there, of course. When the moon on Friday, when the moon moves into Aquarius, it does move into a square with Mercury and Uranus. So that is going to create a little bit of a challenge also, specifically because the moon is sitting right on the cusp of your relationships and your finances. So we are talking a little bit about our relationship to our finances. It's sort of an emotional response trigger around our finances, if that makes sense. And I don't really see this as not having money. I see this more as one of those things that comes up around money. Like specifically, we just talked this morning, as a matter of fact, as I'm recording this, we just talked this morning about your career projects versus the job that you have, and then on top of everything else, you got all this other stuff going on, and to find a balance in that is a little bit difficult. And so I feel like this probably same situation is going to come up again around the moon moving into a square with these 2 planets. So there's a couple of things to share with you about that. The first thing I feel is, again, we're talking about support and getting support in your specific goals. And so I feel like one of the ways that communication is really important in terms of that is to find the right words to use in order to get that support. So for instance, if it's at work and you're trying to find support with a specific project at work, it's simply to make sure that you're using the right communication and you're not emotionally communicating. That's really, really important. Same thing in terms of communication, if it's with your spouse or somebody around you that you may feel you need some support from. Bottom line is that whenever there's a negative aspect that is pointing towards your support system, it always puts you in that place where you feel like you're making all these decisions by yourself and it's all down to you, and basically your decision is going to make or break the whole entire thing. Try not to let it become that much pressure, okay? Because I don't feel that this is a decision that is going to make or break your family. But at the same time, you want to be aware to make sure that when whatever it is that you're doing, you're looking at it and you're using your intuition to feel the best way to go, but you're also looking at it logically, as in what is, of course, the logical best decision for right now. And then you can come to terms with that decision, if that makes sense. And it's not always what you want to hear, but it's always what you need to hear, if that makes sense. So that's what I have for you. And I'm going to pause really quick because I forgot my coffee, and I'll be right back. Okay, coffee in hand, ready to go. Moving on to Jeannette. I do believe we're moving on to Jeannette. Why, yes, we are moving on to Jeannette. Interesting stuff taking place for you this week, specifically as Venus moves into Gemini this week on Tuesday, officially moving into Gemini. You'll feel her influence though as she's coming in, for sure. What's awesome, I'm so sorry, my nose is dripping. What's so awesome about Venus coming into Gemini for you, and actually when I first looked at this, I really did think of you, was that Venus is all about creativity. She's all about creation. She's all about seeing beautiful things around you. That influence to me is really going to play out in terms of a lot of the creative things that you have been working on recently, and it's sort of this burst of creativity in that direction, if that makes sense. Her grand sextile with Pluto as well as Neptune for a time this week amplifies this creativity a lot. And when we're talking specifically, Venus's focus is on your support system. Pluto's focus is on relationships, and then we have Neptune's focus on long-term goals. So I kind of see this playing out for you in a way, in terms of sort of taking control in a way of your goals, of your plans. I know one of your goals is to work from home. And I also know that because of finances and because of this taking place and that taking place, next, all these different things, it's really hard to follow what you know in your heart you really want to do, because you have so many different things to take into consideration. So I kind of feel like some of those decisions may be being eliminated right now, as in something is coming in to eliminate those concerns, or at least make them smaller than they were. If not eliminate completely, to at least make them so that they're not quite as much of a priority as they were maybe say 2 or 3 weeks ago, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of creative effort going towards your long-term goals, which is really, really good. And this is definitely an energy that you need, because I almost visualize you just creating like a creation madman, if that makes sense, which is honestly the kind of energy you need right now. Things have been so stagnant and just not, you're very slowly recovering type thing, that it's just been very, very difficult to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And now the light at the end of the tunnel is definitely a lot brighter. So I feel like this is actually a really, really good week for you, in terms of getting what you want to create together, getting a list together, making sure that you have all of the things that you need to get started, and just see what you can create. And I'm really excited for you. So that's what I have for you this week. And I am going to move on to Connie. We have no planets in Leo this week. We do continue to have the Lilith or dark moon in your sign this week, and she starts to move out of your sign at the end of the week and then goes retrograde again. So she's coming back in. So this week we're focusing on her direct motion message, if that makes sense. Focus is on the past. The dark moon is all about change. That's kind of an oxymoron, because you know that we can't change the past, but her energy is very drastic when it comes to changes. And while you can't change situations and you can't change what happened, you can change how you use the information. And that's really what's important. We all get to this point where the trauma in our lives is overtaking us. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. We've both been there from time to time. But there's also an element of getting to a point where you get to decide whether or not this trauma is going to overtake your life, whether or not it's going to rule your decisions and everything that you do from here on out. And I know that that's not what you want, that you don't want your trauma to rule your life anymore, that you're done with that you're ready to move on. And I feel like while you've gone through a lot of healing in the last couple of weeks, there's a lot of things have really just come up and, been very, very challenging. It's those really challenging things that come up that really help us to understand where we need to fix something in ourselves, if that makes sense. So no, it's not fun. It's not pleasant. It never is. I don't think anybody ever promised that it would be, to be honest with you. But I also feel that by taking this journey within yourself, it helps you to be a little bit more free of the things that have been holding you back, if that makes sense. The other thing that seems to come up around this, as well as in terms of your appointments for this week. And I do feel that because we are kicking off the week with a holiday, that is going to influence your schedule a little bit, even if technically the holiday is on Sunday. It's sort of like the pandemic. It's just going to get used as an excuse. We'll just put it that way. That makes sense. The other thing is that I see something coming up in terms of a pattern with your appointments, that either you're getting a bunch of appointments that people you've already had and you don't really have anything to do with them anymore, or it's something that seems like it's a very specific pattern that keeps happening with your clients over and over again. So be aware of the similarities, because being aware of the similarities will help you to be able to determine what that pattern is and what you need to do in order to maybe eliminate that as being a pattern, if that makes sense. And that's what I have for you. And I'm going to move on to Jenny. We have no planets in Leo this week. The dark moon, or Lilith, continues to be in your sign. Moves out of Leo at the end of the week, turns retrograde, and will be coming back again. So we're still not done with the Lilith, which is kind of interesting because focus is on the past, and the Lilith is all about making drastic changes, which of course we can't do in the past. So we have to look at it in a completely different way. There's a couple of things actually that come up with this. First of all, let me just say, because I know that your first few months of tax season hell is almost at an end. And in a way, I sort of visualize you crawling towards the end of it in some way, which I know is frustrating. But I also feel like there's an element of, it almost seems like you're going to be like, I don't have time to make any changes, which I get, but there's almost an element of change up the way that you are doing it in order to make it seem like it's not quite so heavy a burden, if that makes sense. I have no clue what that looks like, by the way. And there may even be instances of just changing up, like, say, where you go to lunch, or everybody taking off for lunch at the same time and celebrating, different things like that, to sort of make this last week not quite so stressful, if that makes sense, as it has been numerous times in the past. We are also moving into the shadow period of the Mercury retrograde as of Saturday. So right at the end of the week, we move into the shadow period of the retrograde. So the good news is that the retrograde doesn't happen until after the official tax season date is over next week. But as we both know, the shadow period has a tendency to make things a little bit crazy. So the more you can get done before then, the better. Not to say that anything that you get done during the retrograde is going to go bad. We both obviously know that that's not the case. I feel that it's more, it'll cut down on the frustrations as much as possible, specifically if you deal with the really, really difficult cases before that retrograde's there, if that makes sense, or before we get into the shadow period. That way we don't add that layer to a frustration's already there, if that makes sense. The other thing that I'm being shown is specifically about the weekends, at the very beginning of the week, actually, as we kick off the week on Sunday. It's really important the days that you have to rest, you take the time to rest. And I know that you know this already, but I feel that it's important to remind you of this, because I'm sure that busyness at work also means that there's a lot of other things outside of work that you haven't been able to get to, and you're going to want to try and get to them since you have a day off, so that you don't get farther behind. Just make sure that there's some time in there for that hot bath and, a glass of wine and some Jenny time. Okay. Because the more you can do that, the easier it is for you to focus on what you need to get done. So that's what I have for you, Jenny. And good luck. I'm over here rooting for you, as always. I know you're going to get through it. And we're going to move on to Linda. Yes, we are moving on to Linda. So we have no planets in Virgo. We do continue to have Ceres influencing Virgo in retrograde. So Ceres, known as the Great Mother, has that very nurturing, loving, healing sort of effect, and focus is on the brain and how you think. And it's really, actually, this is a very interesting concept: nurturing your thoughts, nurturing how you think about these various different situations. Now, for you personally, I see that playing out in terms of, in some way, and this may even surprise you being a Virgo, but in some way, I feel that those thoughts, these nurturing thoughts, are being pointed specifically at people that have a tendency to be very difficult to work with. So normally your brain goes to this very destructive, oh my God, I want to strangle this person because they're just not getting it place. And I feel like by having that mindset around these particular people that just aren't up to par with the Virgo ways, this sort of mindset actually may be working against you, specifically in business, but it can also be working against you in other areas as well. I feel like the more that you think an individual is being irresponsible, or you can't rely on them, or you can't count on them, that seems to manifest itself a lot more the more you think on those terms. If you were to change that and nurture that perception towards those people, you might actually get different results. Now, this is not something, of course, that works every single time, and you do the same process every time and it works every time. What I am saying is that it also changes the way you work with the individual as well. And it's that balance that I think seems to start to make a difference, and things start to move forward. And it doesn't seem so much like you're trying to swim through glass to get where you need to go, if that makes sense. The other thing that I'm picking up around you this week is I get the word delays. Now, we are entering the shadow period of the Mercury retrograde on Saturday, so right at the end of the week. But I feel like there's a delay in information that's coming up around you, or there's a delay in something taking place. So basically, a deadline isn't being met, and I don't necessarily see that it's you as the person that is not meeting the deadline, but I do really get a very deep sense that you're going to be directly affected by this person that's not meeting their deadline, if that makes sense, which is going to cause some frustrations. But I also am being shown that things can be moved around a little bit to ensure that this is done properly, even if it's not done on time, if that makes sense. And I think it being done properly is 1,000 times more important than the timing of when it gets done. So you take that for however you want to take it. And that's what I have for you this week, Linda. And I am going to move on to Matalyn. We continue to have no planet in Virgo this week. We do continue to have Ceres, that secondary planet that is still in Virgo, still retrograde all week long. So we're mirroring her influence back at ourselves, which is generally what a retrograde is. Ceres is known as the Great Mother, so she has a very maternal, a very nurturing, a very loving influence. And I feel like with it being retrograde, that maternal nurturing instinct is you're sort of mirroring that back at yourself, if that makes sense. And there's a couple of things that come up. One, I kind of do pick up that your energy is a bit low at certain parts this week. And in some cases, nurturing yourself, taking care of yourself, is what helps you get through that low energy time. And I'm not exactly sure if this is because, you're sick, it's allergy season, you might pick up a little cold, everybody is, they're sort of everywhere. Or if this is just you've been doing a lot and you have a couple of days where you just really need the rest, which is fine. Take the rest if you need to. The other thing is that the way that we think about certain things, and Virgos are extremely analytical in their thought process, but how we think about certain things really has a huge impact on whether or not there is success in the things that we're thinking about. So for instance, we're going to use an example that's very, very close to home, and that is that the relationship that you have going on with your mom right now and the things that are infiltrating that relationship. The more you focus on the negative, the more you focus on the things that she's doing that you don't like, the more you're going to see those things. Now, just because you stop thinking about it doesn't mean she's going to completely stop doing it. Of course, it's not really realistic, but it will seem like the less you focus on it, maybe the more successful she will be, because you're not continuing to have a conversation about it. And every time you have a conversation about it, it seems like for whatever reason, she just goes out of her way to do the things that you don't want her to do. So you have to change the conversation, and in order to change the conversation, you have to change your perception of it. So rather than looking at your mom has a problem, try to understand why your mom has a problem, and how you can help her, not with her problem, but the why. Because the more you can help her with the why, the more you can help her to help herself in her problem, if that makes sense. And that's what I have for you, my dear. And I am going to move on to Theresa. We have no planets to influence Libra this week, not even any secondary planets. There's no influence whatsoever. It just is what it is. Oh my goodness. Oh, okay, that just came out of nowhere. Focus is on the home this week, and it could be that maybe you need to spend some time there this week. I feel like you're such a typical Libra. I mean, you love to be social, and there are times when you get really tired and you don't want to be social, but you're like, no, let me just drag myself out there and be social. And I feel like this week you might want to make a different decision. I feel like between the work and everything that's been going on in your life and with you, it's just really important for you to take the time for you, and to take the time to rest, and also to take time dealing with issues that are specific home issues. Not to say that you have a lot of those issues. I just feel like, we all have those things that we kind of put on the back burner because we just don't have time to. And I do see some space opening up to deal with those things as well. There's the one thing specifically that it just feels like you've been putting it off forever. It's really important to get that done this week, especially because we're hitting the shadow period of the Mercury retrograde right at the end of the week on Saturday, which means that retrograde is coming. So if this has to do with finances or anything like that, you definitely want to try and get it done before we hit the shadow period of that retrograde, and it starts to kind of throw its influence in there as well. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a situation of putting something off, and then because I put it off, I created a bigger problem for myself, Mercury retrograde or not. So it's just really important to make sure that those things get taken care of as much as you can this week. The last thing that is kind of coming up around you, or that I'm being shown, actually has to do with your pup. And I'm seeing something around his foot, one of the front paws. And I feel like either you're gonna see like a limp, or you're gonna see him kind of I can't think of the word that I want to use here, but something's up with that foot, and I'm seeing something sticking in it. So you can take this one of two things. I feel like it's important to either watch where he's walking to make sure he doesn't get any stickers in between his toes, or something like that. This looks like something that's really small, so it's not like a big old foxtail you'll be able to see like, really, really far away. It's more like a splinter that you have to look for. So, if you kind of watch where he's walking, or if you start to see him favor that foot, that's kind of the word I was looking for. Obviously, the sooner you can get to that and deal with that problem, the quicker it will heal up, and of course the less expensive it will be as well, because you might be able to deal with it without having to go to the vet. So that's what I have for you, Theresa. And I am moving on to Regina. We have no planets in Scorpio, although the moon is kicking off the week in Sagittarius, but we'll have a bit of an influence very early on Sunday. So on the West Coast, for me, that means it'll probably be gone by the time I wake up. For you, it'll be there for a few more hours, probably, because you're a little bit further away in a different time zone. That moon moving out of your sign at the beginning of the week is moving out in a T-square with Venus as well as Saturn. The issue with that, really, a T-square is a pretty big challenge. So the moon's focus is on those you love. Venus's focus is on those that love and support you. Saturn's focus is on your long-term goals. I kind of feel that a couple of different things are sort of playing out here in this particular aspect. First of all, we always have those instances where we feel we need support, and the people that should be there to support us just don't seem to be there to support us. And it creates an emotional reaction, especially when you got the moon and Venus, two very emotional planets, playing into this. And Venus is really pointing this to be like feminine emotions. So how women act emotionally, you want to avoid that if you can. Specifically, the main things that women do to get in our own way, like for instance, when your husband comes up to you when you're being really, really quiet and says, "What's the matter?" and you go, "Nothing," instead of telling him you did something stupid and I'm mad at you, just coming out and saying it. And yeah, I do it too. Okay. And sometimes I do it because, it's just not worth the argument, or he won't understand what I'm trying to say, or what have you. Change the way you communicate it. Obviously, if you use the same communication tactics that you do every single time, it is always going to have the same result, and the result is not effective to the problem. So you have to change the way you approach it, as well as changing the wording in there a little bit. The other thing is, when it comes to your own personal goals, and specifically the responsibility to your own personal goals, this is where Saturn really comes in. Your responsibility is there to your goals, whether you have support or not. And sometimes we just have to go and do what we need to do, even if somebody isn't being supportive of it, because this is what we need to do. And I can't tell you how many times I've been in the situation with other people where, myself included, okay, I'm guilty of this too. I should be doing something towards my own professional goals, but somebody else's actions are frustrating me, and it becomes a good excuse as to why I can't focus on my goals right now, because I'm too frustrated over what somebody else is doing. Honestly, it makes no sense to do that, because one, you're handing your power over to somebody else, and why would you do that? Nobody is going to have the right kind of mindset for your success if they're holding on to your power. So that's something that you and only you can do. And if you asked any successful person, not one of them would say, "I am where I am today because I let this person take power over my life." That's just, it doesn't happen, right? But every unsuccessful person you meet probably has that story. So we want to avoid being in that place. Luckily, this is kind of a big thing that sort of happens at the beginning of the week, and then the moon moves on, and things kind of sort of quiet down a little bit, and focus is on those you love and continues to be on those you love this week. So I sort of see that playing out for you as maybe being able to actually have the time to enjoy the people that are in your life, the people that you're responsible for in some way. I don't see like a lot of issues coming up around that, if that makes sense. It's more of a, I always love that time where I can just sit and be with with the people that I love, not be frustrated with them, even if they're being frustrating right now. Just enjoying their company, enjoying being with them, enjoying having them in our lives. I think we don't have enough opportunities to do that. And by not taking those opportunities, it sort of puts us in this space where we're stuck just being constantly frustrated with them. And that's really no way to live or no way to be in a relationship either. So that's what I have for you, Regina. I'm moving on to Theresa Sheppard. No planets in Scorpio this week, although the moon is moving into Sagittarius pretty early in the morning on Sunday. Pretty early in the morning if you're on the West Coast means probably before you wake up in the morning. If you're on the East Coast, because you could be anywhere, that's about midday or so. So you may feel the effects of it in the morning and not necessarily throughout the rest of the day. There's a little bit of a challenge as the moon moves out of Scorpio into Sagittarius when the moon forms a T-square with Venus, which is focused on your support system, and Saturn, which is, of course, focused on your long-term goals. And the moon in Scorpio's focus is on those you love. So of course, this creates that little bit of a challenge when those that you consistently support don't feel like they're supporting you. But I also see this really happening around your career goals more than anything. And part of how that plays out to me is it feels like you have either been working towards specific goals or working towards specific changes that all of a sudden feel like it's not going to happen, if that makes sense. Like all the work that you've done is coming to nothing. And that's really, really frustrating. It's temporary though, because this, of course, this fear is being brought on by the moon. So once the moon moves out of that, it won't seem quite so drastic anymore. And you also need to understand that the moon's grand sextile with Pluto and Neptune kind of counterbalances that a little bit, because Neptune is also focused on your long-term goals and Pluto is focused on your relationships, telling you that in some cases your personal power is in your ability to form the right relationships to get what it is that you want. So it creates a challenge, but it creates a solution to the challenge at the same time, which is pretty amazing, really. As the moon moves out of there, there's no more planet influences. So for the rest of the week, there's a couple of things that I see coming up for you. One, because we continue to be focused on those you love, I feel like there's some time opening up in your schedule for that very purpose, actually, to be able to spend some time with people that you haven't spent time with in a while. I feel like this comes up a lot in your readings. And I think the reason why it comes up a lot is because you have so many responsibilities. The responsibilities seem to be first and foremost, always first and foremost. And then the things that you would like to do, the things that bring you joy, seem to be on the back burner. And I think why this keeps coming up for you, or why it's important that this keeps coming up for you, is to remind you that your responsibilities to yourself include spending time with people that make you feel good. not just the people you're responsible for. So that can be extended family, that can be girlfriends, that can be anybody that makes you feel good. The more you do that, it's, it's sort of like the ladies meetings, the successful women group meetings that we used to go to. It just felt so nice to leave that meeting as you were leaving, all of these wonderful friends that were part of that meeting. And I feel like this is what's kind of needed right now, is that camaraderie between people that have a similar focus, if that makes sense. And that's what I have for you this week. And I'm going to move on to Jillian. Hi, darling. Oh, we have no planets in Scorpio this week. We do have the moon moving into Sagittarius right at the beginning of the week. So we will feel the effects of it a little bit Sunday morning, but with any luck, you'll sleep right through it. And with any luck, so will I. Because by noon, of course, the moon is officially all the way in Sagittarius, so you won't feel it quite in the same way as you felt it the day before. We'll put it that way. Focus is on those you love this week, and I kind of feel like there's a couple of things that come out of this for you. The first thing that I feel is really important is not so much spending time with somebody that's important to you, although that is really important. But I feel like it's not even just that it's not enough time or you need more time. I just feel that there's going to be an instance this week where you just need time, if that makes sense. And I don't see that as being a problem necessarily. It might be a problem like right in that moment, but to be able to take that time, I don't see a problem with that, if that makes sense. The other thing that I feel is coming up around this for you this week is I feel like, what are we looking at here? Okay. I sort of feel like you've been thinking about somebody a lot lately, like you've been wanting to spend time with a specific individual a lot lately. And I'm not sure if you have put a voice to that, if you have mentioned that to the person, or if you're just kind of holding back and hoping that they sort of pop up and show up. You definitely want to say something. You have to be aware though of how you say things. There's a lot of really crappy communication patterns in our family, and we've all used them. I'm not going to sit here and say that I've never used any of them, because I have. And even though we all taught you these negative communication patterns, that doesn't mean that you can't choose a different one. Okay. Because I was taught a lot of negative communication patterns, and I make choices every day whether I am going to choose to use them or I'm going to choose a better way of communicating, specifically because we're entering the shadow period of the Mercury retrograde right at the end of the week. And this is when those negative communication patterns start to really become a problem. So I feel like if you're not getting your point across to somebody, changing the wording and the tone and what's behind what you're trying to say is going to help you a lot more than trying to force them to do what you want, if that makes sense. The last thing that is coming up around you, I feel, has to do with I keep seeing your grandma coming up, Shirley. And I'm not sure if this time has anything to do, or this needing time has anything to do with her, or she may be taking up your focus and time, if that makes sense. So I'm kind of going into sort of the direction of maybe she's not feeling well, or there's something going on there with her health that's making it so that maybe you have to focus your time more on her to take care of her. If that is the case, please let me know how she's doing. Okay. That's what I have for you, darling. And I am going to move on to Sheri. In case you didn't notice, you came up in the horoscopes for this week too, because I just recorded those right before here. And now we're just going to go ahead and cement that right in personally for you. Aren't you excited about it? Oh my gosh, because of course we're kicking off the week with the moon in Sagittarius, and it is bouncing from good to bad the whole entire time. So it is going to feel like a bit of a roller coaster for the first few days of the week. The moon moves into a T-square with Saturn, which is focused on long-term goals, as well as Venus, which is focused on your support system. The moon's focus is on those you love. This is a classic case of I can't manage my diet because I have to cook different food for Matt and different food for Maddie, and they're not supporting me by eating the same food, right? This is a classic case of that seems to be coming up. And what I really need to tell you about this is, and something that I learned recently from our mama Sheri, is that we have no control over what everybody else is doing. And whether we think what they're doing is right, wrong, or indifferent really doesn't matter. I don't like being told that. I hate being told that, I mean, my opinion should matter, right? Well, it doesn't matter in our growth process, because when we're not focused on ourselves, we're not growing. And we're not focused on ourselves, we're not taking care of ourselves. And that whole eating issue has to do with what? One meal a day? Because the other two meals are completely and totally you and on your own, right? So you only can use that excuse once a day, but for whatever reason, you're allowing yourself to use that excuse all day long. So I really feel that this is one of those things that's going to pop up to specifically show you in a way that is not pleasant that Sheri needs to get out of her own way, period. End of story. As we move into the next day, all of a sudden that goes away and the moon moves into a trine with Jupiter and the sun. Jupiter is, of course, Sagittarius's ruling planet, and the moon's focus moves into your day-to-day schedule, while the sun and Jupiter are focused on your career. So what's interesting about this is I can take this a couple of different ways. One, if you learn the lesson from the previous day, it opens you up to new opportunities to look at, maybe peruse, maybe think about, maybe sign up for, maybe pursue. You never know. Sky is still the limit. We're never too old. Okay? Let's just put it out there right now. We're never too old. The sky is still the limit. We can still do whatever we set out to do, excuses or no excuses. Once we move into Tuesday, the moon moves into an opposition with Mars and a square with Neptune. Mars continues to be focused on some pretty heavy emotional anger coming up. And in some cases, this is exactly what you need to do in order to get through this problem, because the reason why you can't let go of everybody else has to support me or I can't do it has to do with this internal anger. And the more you deal with that anger, the less you hold on to everybody else has to do something supportive in order for me to take care of me, if that makes sense. The square with Neptune, again, we're focused on long-term goals. So this is also blocking your intuition and your ability to use your intuition towards achieving your long-term goals as well. This is all this old emotional crap is what's getting in your way. So yeah, it's a big pain in the ass. The whole thing is a giant pain in the ass. But what comes of it is freedom. It's release. It's you identifying how you're holding yourself back and eliminating that problem. The book I just wrote, I had to make a conscious decision to take all of the excuses that I had been using as to why I hadn't written this book in the last 15 years, when I've been told for 15 years to write it. I had to take all of my excuses, put them in a garbage bag, stick them in the garbage can, watch them go away as the garbage man took them, wave goodbye as the truck drove away. And now, because I consciously know that I threw those away and they were taken away by the garbage man, if they try to come up again, I can't use them because I threw them away. And they will always try and infiltrate, because that's how the brain works. But the more you have control over that, and the more you have control over your brain and how your brain is functioning for you, the easier it is for you. As we move into the rest of the week, the moon is like gone, focuses on your day-to-day schedule. Things do calm down a little bit. It's not quite so hectic and crazy. I am being shown your dad's knee, and I want to say it's the right one. I don't see like a huge problem. I don't see him I almost see him wrenching it a little bit and maybe he's been doing so good. And then it's just like this little thing that happens that causes some pain, slows him down a little bit. And the only reason I'm bringing this up is because it's going to be frustrating for him. So you're going to have to, unfortunately, deal with that frustration. But it's nothing major. In fact, it's nothing that's going to last forever either. So that's what I have for you this week. Cheers. Okay, moving on to Peg. We're going to kick off this week with the moon in Sagittarius, bringing some pretty big challenges actually for the first 3 days of the week. We'll start with Sundays. The moon moves into a T-square with Venus and Saturn. Saturn is focused on your responsibility to your long-term goals. Venus, which rules your creativity, is focused on your support system. The moon, of course, is focused on those you love. So this a lot of times creates one of those issues where the people that you support should be supporting you and they're not. But I also feel that there's something that's dampening your creativity, and it's this creativity that's really necessary in order for you to achieve your goals. And that's why it's not that you're ignoring your responsibility to your goals, it's that there's some sort of creative block that's going on, which is defined in the beginning of the week, but I kind of see that sort of following you through the rest of the week a little bit as well. Maybe not quite so intensely, but it's still there. As we move into Monday, that T-square goes away and the moon moves into a trine with Jupiter and the sun, which are pretty much in conjunction with each other, focused on your career. So I feel like one of two things is sort of happening here. It's like you get this big emotional frustration one day, and then boom, it feels like you're moving forward. And then we get into Tuesday, where the moon moves into opposition with Mars, which is focused on inner trauma and specifically inner anger, and moves into a square with Neptune, again bringing focus on your long-term goals again, but bringing that intuitive element into it. And it's that old anger that is that inner anger is what is keeping you from being able to use your intuition clearly to see what your next steps are in your long-term goals. So it's like frustrating and then better and then frustrating, and the better is even like, ooh, this might be a fantastic career or financial opportunity. And then it sort of creates that wheel where things are frustrating, and then you get this wonderful opportunity, and then the next day you're like, you know what, it's probably not that wonderful an opportunity, because it's being given to me, right? And my life is a shit show, blah blah blah. You could go there if you really want to, but I don't think you really want to. And if you need to go there for a minute to release some of this old anger, by all means, just put a time limit on it. As the moon moves out of your sign, things start to smooth down. Focus is on your day-to-day schedule. And I have to say that because you've had a lot of emotional stuff going on with the moon at the beginning of the week, towards the end of the week, it's really important that your schedule includes some peg time, something specific that brings you joy, that helps your creative juices flow. Even if they're flowing into nothing, if that makes sense, your creative juices don't have to flow into something specific. Anything to get those creative juices flowing is necessary to your growth at this time. So whatever it is, preferably something that you just really enjoy doing, because that's going to have the best effect on overall on what it is that you are focused on. So that is what I have for you, Peg. And I'm going to move on to Mama Sheri. We are kicking off the week with the moon in Sagittarius, and things are going to be a little crazy for the first 3 days of the week, unfortunately. We're starting off with the moon in a T-square with Venus, which is focused on your support system, and Saturn, which is focused on your long-term goals. And in some cases, your long-term financial goals and your responsibility to those long-term financial goals. This is interesting to me, is the moon's placement during this time is on those you love. So when we're talking about your support system, you have a fantastic support system, but they can't support you with you achieving your financial goals. And I know you know this, but I feel like this has a lot also to do with mindset as well, that because you are on your own and because you are, in the situation, the financial situation that you're currently in, it can feel like you're never going to get out of that position. You're always going to be in this financial position, but that is not true. That mindset is actually holding you back from being able to find an avenue outside of that situation, if that makes sense. And in all honesty, I mean, support is always nice, but you don't need it. But when you do need it, you always have it. As we move into Monday, the moon's trine with the sun and Jupiter is like a completely different, it goes from really frustrating to all these opportunities seem to be opening up to me. So it feels like you're expanding and growing in terms of your career. The time you need in your schedule is available. It's there for you to use to be able to expand on your career. So we have a lot of really good energy kicking off the week on a Monday, which is really nice. It's always nice to have that kind of energy on a Monday specifically. But then as we move into Tuesday, the moon moves into opposition with Mars and into a square with Neptune. Again, Neptune is focused on long-term goals, but Mars is focused on inner trauma, and Mars is all about anger. So in many cases, we're releasing some really old frustration and really old anger that has roots that are really, really deep. And this anger is what's causing you, or what's preventing you from expanding in these financial goals, if that makes sense. It's even in many cases blocking your intuition to help you get through that. And let me just put it this way, okay? Your fears of doing this on your own are not helping you at all, and they never will. And you know that. So there's really no reason for you to keep entertaining those fears, if that makes sense. As the moon moves out on Tuesday, Focus continues to be on your day-to-day schedule. I don't see any issues coming up with that. There may be a bit of an accidental double booking coming up at some point this week. Don't sweat it. It's not like a huge deal. Just try everything that you can to work out the schedule with as little frustration as possible. And that's what I have for you. And finally, Alyssa, we have a couple of interesting things going on in Pisces. We're going to start with Saturn, which is focused on your financial goals specifically, as it's like right there on the cusp of finances and your long-term goals. So I look at that very much as financial goals, which I feel is something that you've been focused on a lot lately, and there's good reason. Saturn is telling you it's your responsibility and nobody else's, so you got to take care of it, right? And I'm a firm believer that a woman should be able to take care of her own financial goals. It doesn't matter what kind of man you have. There's just been way too many instances in the history of men and women where women have been screwed by their men, and it's not always because they go out of their way to do so. Sometimes you got a wonderful hardworking man who chops off his hand and he can't work anymore, and you're the one that's got to take up the slack. So this day and age, we don't rely on men, and because we don't rely on men, we should never rely on men financially. Just trust me on that one, okay? Saturn's trine with Mars this week is kind of interesting because Mars is still focused on an inner trauma space. So we're releasing anger around very old trauma, and we're specifically releasing this anger around money issues that come up from the past. And it's really bizarre to think about any kind of money mindset starting in childhood, but most of them do actually. And when I found that out, I was like blown away that this was even a thing. Kids don't really interact with money a lot, but they do see how their families live. They do see the struggle. They see, a lot of times when you come from a family that has a lot of money, I wish I was, but you come from a family that has a lot of money and you're being spoiled, you're still getting the wrong money mindset. So understanding and releasing anger around your financial goals is really necessary, because you can't create a goal if you have a bunch of crap getting in the way of you being able to move forward in that goal. So in terms of, let's say work, for example, right? If you come from a family who didn't do a lot of college, then, you start to think, well, nobody else in my family went to college, so why would I? And that means that you can only make a certain level of money, and you can't go up over that money. And if your goals exceed that amount of money, you have to figure out another way. And, you can get a job that pays you more, or you can get a second job so that you can make more money. Either way, by understanding what your financial goals are, it tells you what you need to do in order to achieve them, if that makes sense. We also continue to have Neptune, which is where we're focusing our intuition and our intuitive abilities towards our long-term goals. And in a grand sextile with Venus, which is focused on your support system, and Pluto, which is focusing on relationships, this actually creates this beautiful space for you to find the creative support you need within your relationships to achieve some of these goals. So that can come in the form of advice from those who've been there before. You may have some financial advisors, for example, that are in the family that can help you out with that. Neptune is in a square with the moon on Tuesday, and the moon's focus is on your day-to-day schedule. So that day in particular, it may feel like there's just too many things coming up and getting in the way of you being able to really focus your time on these goals. But that's one day, it's not the whole week. So if things are difficult that day, put it off and go back to it tomorrow, as long as you get back to it tomorrow. The last thing that I really have for you is there is a square between Saturn and Venus being focused on your support system. So I get a couple of things with that, actually. First of all, I feel like you may be finding creative ways to come up with some extra money. And it sort of feels like you keep hitting brick walls. And that does not mean that you're not going to find those creative ways to make money. It just means that if you keep hitting the same wall over and over and over again, you need to expand your search a little bit. So just because what you want isn't working doesn't mean that there isn't another avenue that might work a little bit better, if that makes sense. So maybe just instead of trying to make a square peg fit into a round hole, and you don't want to look for the square peg hole, round out the square so it turns into a circle and make it fit, if that makes sense. If you can do that, of course. So that is what I have for you. And that is what I have for everybody. Thanks so much for hanging out this week for the readings with me. I'm Alyssa Bruce, the Heavy Metal Psychic. I so enjoy getting together with you guys every single week, and I sure hope you do. Let me know in the comments if there is anything that I can improve on, because of course I am always open to making things better than they were last week. Again, I'm Melissa Bruce, the Heavy Metal Psychic. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next week. Make it a great week, everybody.